fast, healthy, and Ono cooking demonstration will focus on sweet and savory crepes. On behalf of our sponsors, the Awala Leaf Cafe at Windward Community College, Tanoa Senior Services on Maui, and AARP Hawaii, I'd like to thank you for tuning in this evening. Move this over. If you're unfamiliar with AARP Hawaii, we're a membership organization for people 50 and older, but what we do for everyone. We hope that with this series, you can learn some techniques that you can use to build or maintain your healthy lifestyle. I'm going to give you a quick overview, a few housekeeping tips here. This is a picture of what you probably are seeing at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Sometimes it's at the top. If you're using an iPad, it might be up there. At this point, everybody's on mute. If you want to submit a question for the chef, please click on the button that says Q&A and type in your question. Jackie Boland, our Community Outreach Director for AARP Hawaii, and I will be monitoring the questions to be sure that they get to the chef. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you may type your questions in the comments area there. We won't be using the raised hand command because all the questions will go in the Q&A section. The chat command isn't necessarily going to be needed unless you have a technical question that you want to communicate, something about Zoom or not hearing well or something like that. We have Alice Swift and Dave DeWitt here managing the chat, and they're going to act as our technical gurus to help us out. We're going to be giving away 3 prizes of custom spices from the Awala Leaf Cafe via random drawing number this evening. And if you're chosen, you'll get a notification from Dave via the private chat. So please monitor that. And you'll need to confirm your name and email address so we can find out how to get you the prize. And hopefully that will cover all the technical and we're ready to go. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chef Daniel Swift, who's going to be leading us through this exciting cooking demonstration this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Dan at this point.
Voila. Aloha, everyone. Can you see and hear me, Jackie, Jim? All right.
Yes, fine.
I'm great.
Looks good.
All right. Awesome. Well, welcome, everyone. Sweet and savory crepes tonight. Thanks, Jim, for the intro. I wanted to go over, we sent the recipe out as we always do, and we'll go over the making of that recipe. A lot of variations that you can have in terms of the flavorings and things that you can do in the batter itself. There's some key ingredients, but there's still a lot of room for creativity. So we'll talk about that when we get them going. I listed out a couple keys to success when you're making crepes. The first one that I'd written down there is to have a great nonstick pan. I have a few here and I'll show you the different types. More than anything here, I have different sizes. It just depends on what kind of crepe I'm making. Is it a larger one or a smaller one? A smooth batter, you definitely want that. I'm going to use a blender tonight. I'll show you a hand blender or immersion blender as well. And if you want to make it by hand, simply whipping it by hand, you can do that also. But I recommend for a smooth batter just to use a blender if you have one, or immersion blender. And then the right temperature in your pan. So it doesn't matter if you're cooking electric, gas, induction, any of them will work. There's also a wide range of heats, probably anywhere between medium and medium high. I actually made some just before the show to have ready, and I had the stove in the back all the way on high as it would go. I just had to move a little bit more quickly. So you got a little leeway in there to play around. And then the proper filling consistency is important. We're doing a sweet one tonight and a savory one. The sweet one will have an apple filling, apple and pear actually, with a little bit of yogurt. And then the savory one is a chicken and vegetable. So you just don't want it too runny. Really, that's the main thing to think about, so that it doesn't make it too ultra soggy. and leach through. And then the last thing I listed there is just timing. So working with the pan, working with the batter, how wet is it? What's the temperature? How long do you bake it if you're going to heat them up after you fill them, those sorts of things. So just a few tips to think about as you get going in the process. So the recipe, as I said, did go out, and it is super simple. You can see it right here. Everything I need for it is here except for this butter, which I have on the top of this little toaster oven to keep it melted. You could also use, this is butter, but you could also use Smart Balance or some other butter substitute or a margarine. You could use olive oil if you were doing a savory crepe. And quite honestly, you could omit the fat if you were really, really watching your cholesterol or watching your fat intake. You're going to get some fat from the yolks, obviously, but there's a little bit of variation there. So in this particular recipe, we've got that butter, not a lot, and this will make probably a dozen crepes. I've got a double batch here. This will actually make about 20, and depending on how thick I want them. And if you divide 2 tablespoons of butter amongst 20 different crepes, it's a very, very small amount. We've got a pinch of salt. We've got some all-purpose flour. I've got 4 eggs. And in this case, in that recipe, I wrote some milk and also water. That could be straight water. That could be straight milk. It's up to you. We use powdered milk in the kitchen, so we're not stocking a lot of milk right now. So I had the water and I just dissolved some of the milk powder in here. So the 2 different liquids, sort of up to you. You get more flavor, obviously, if you're using the milk. But you could go straight water if you wanted to. You could get creative and use guava nectar or some other beverage like that. Any kind of liquid would work. Just think about the consistency. If it's a thick, syrupy type consistency, you might want to thin it down to where it's about the consistency of whole milk, or in this case, I'm using 2%. But those are all of the ingredients for that. I'm going to mix it in the blender, but before I do, I just want to talk about pans really quick. This is a really nice saute pan. This is a 10-inch or a 12-inch all-clad pan, but it's not a non-stick. So I would not recommend that you try to make crepes in a pan that is not non-stick. You could try to spray it lightly, but you're probably going to run into trouble because you've got the egg. You may put sugar. I did not add sugar to this because we have a savory dish as well, but you'll be struggling against that pan if you don't have a good quality nonstick. So I've got the same size pan here that's a nonstick. This is a little bit used, a little bit beat up, but I found that if I do the first crepe with a light spraying and get it going, then it worked fine for the rest of it. This is the same brand.
Dan?
Yeah.
Before you go on, may I ask you a couple questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. Kathy wants to know, can you use, am I pronouncing this correctly, ghee, G-H-E-E?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. You can do that.
Sure.
Any fat you want would be fine. Up to you. Yes.
Okay. And Bonnie Bella asks, how about almond milk? Could you substitute that for the milk?
Almond milk, absolutely. Any liquid, any fat. So hopefully for those of you who followed the show, what we try to do is focus on like categories of ingredients. So there's not a lot you could do in terms of substituting eggs. Quail eggs, it could be a little expensive. You'd have to use a lot of them. We don't use a lot of duck eggs, but you need an egg in there, and we tend to use chicken. All-purpose flour would work if you're working on gluten-free diet. There are some gluten-free substitutes that you can pick up at the store, and you just need to adjust it for the consistency. And then the liquid, totally up to you. Water to whatever. Any of those would work great.
Right. And one more related question. Char wants to know, can we make the batter ahead of time and refrigerate to use later?
Absolutely. It's best to make it and let it set and rest for at least an hour, 30 minutes to an hour to hydrate the flour. I made some in advance so that we have it done. But yeah, this batter will hold up in the fridge for a couple of days, no problem. You could also make the crepes in advance and then freeze those or refrigerate those, which I'll show you later as well. Great question.
Egg whites or egg beater?
Egg beaters, yep, or egg whites. You're not going to get the color and you're not going to get the fat from the yolks, obviously, which is probably the goal of using a white or using a egg beater type product. But egg beaters, for example, will have a little yellow color in there, so you'll get a little bit more of the color in the finished product. If it's white flour, white milk, white eggs, no fat, you're not going to get a lot of color in the finished product, but that's okay. You'll still get a good flavor. So great question.
One more, then we'll let you get on.
Yep.
How about whole wheat flour? Could that be used?
Absolutely. Any kind of flour, garbanzo bean, tapioca. I mean, you can get really, really creative. You're just going to have to experiment a little bit with the consistency. That's the main thing that you're going to want to think about. So, but I love those kinds of questions because everybody has their own, maybe special diet or approach to the way they cook. And it's so important that you understand the role that each of these ingredients play, right? Milk or water is providing the moisture. You've got the protein and the coagulation that you're going to get from an egg. You'll also get the fat and the emulsification from the yolk. Flour is the binding agent that holds it together. Fat in the form of butter or whatever adds flavor, adds richness to it. Pinch of salt also to increase the flavor. So if you were to add sugar, obviously flavor, tenderness, and other things. So yeah, great questions. Just remember that a lot of these things are designed so that you can adapt them to whatever you want, whole wheat flour or whatever. Okay, great question. The last thing I'll just show this pan. This is Sand Island. I picked this up. This is what most of your aide cooks in the hotels and in the buffets. Remember, we used to get omelet stations at the end. They'll have these. They're about $20. The Ball Wrath, I think, is the brand. Really, really good nonstick. Works great. So a couple different sizes of that as well. So if you're stacking these, just tend to put a paper towel between them or be really gentle. You don't want to bang them around and scratch the surface. So I'm going to go with I'm going to make about an 8-inch crepe, the size we're doing here. And I've got it right now on high heat. I can move this up here and I'm going to reduce it to low to let that, or medium-ish, to allow the pan to heat up while I make the batter itself. So I've got my blender, and like I said, this is what I would recommend. I have in the recipe that you can use a whip and a bowl, which you can, but this will make it a lot easier, and or an immersion blender, which is basically like a blender on a stick. You would just put your ingredients in a container and then insert this, and there's a spinning blade that will blend it up for you. And then this washes up really easy. So very, very convenient. Not very expensive these days. You can pick up an immersion blender for $20, and it's an essential tool in the kitchen. Yeah, and you can go ahead if you got other questions, Jim. I'm just going to add the wet ingredients in here.
Is there any kind of a particular brand of nonstick pans, or what's the best place to get them?
I go to Bar Greens. It's a restaurant supply, Bar Green Ellison and on Sand Island, and they have a variety of different ones. I just go honestly with the aluminum, the least expensive ones, like the one I showed you, and it works great. This one was a gift by Chef Dale Thomas, actually, a couple Christmases ago. If you watched the show, you know Dale was here doing a meat series. I don't know what brand it is, Analon, but any new nonstick will work. So just, make sure that it's not scratched up and not worn out, and you'll have no problem with it. So in here, I just put the wet ingredients. I'm going to blend those up first just to make them nice and even. This shouldn't be too loud. And that only takes a second. And then I'm going to dump in my flour, and I'll blend that up as well. A little bit of salt. And always put a lid on a blender if you're going to use it. Put it on low to start. Never start it on high because it can explode on you, especially if it's warm. So always turn it on low, turn it on, and then you can increase the speed. And that's all there is to it if you're using a blender. With a hand whisk and bowl, you might need to take a little bit longer. And here's where the consistency becomes important. We want to make sure that it's an even batter and consistency. I see a little bit of flour stuck on the side. I'm going to tap it. Give it a stir with the whisk. And you can see how thin it is. So basically a crepe is a thin pancake. It's not leavened with any baking soda or baking powder, so we're not going to end up with something that rises really high like a nice buttermilk pancake. It's just a thinner batter and no leavening. And then you usually would strain it. Honestly, if you're using a blender or an immersion blender, I don't know that a strainer is absolutely necessary. It breaks everything up really, really well. But if you're doing it by hand, you might want to run it through a strainer. And I've got a small one here. Just going to strain it just to make sure that there's, well, if there were any eggshells or anything in there, the blender would have taken care of it. But you may get a couple pieces of flour, and you don't want that in your finished crepe.
Hey, Chef Dan, what kind of blender is that? So Mouse typed in, and I agree. We didn't even hear it.
This is a Vitamix blender. They make a bunch of different ones. I wouldn't say that you need to get something that, they're kind of expensive. They're commercial and industrial strength, but any blender will work. Your old glass type blenders, the one my mom and grandma used to make or used to use, would work just fine for this sort of thing. Anything that's going to blend it up. And then, like I said, if you're using an immersion blender, let me set this aside. You would have your items in a bowl or a container like this, and you just insert it and hit the button. And what it has on the end of the stick is the blade, just like on the bottom of a blender. So rather than have to put things into a blender and blend them up, you can take the blender to the pot or to the bowl. And I mean, these are just indispensable today in the kitchen, at least for me. So you can see if I use it here.
And Alice typed in that maybe it was a Zoom filter that was quiet, making the blender sound quiet.
Yeah, it might be. It might be. This blender is very quiet. There's not a lot of noise to it. Was this one noisy?
Yes.
Okay, because the big blender is really, really quiet. So I'll just set that there.
Is that a gas or electric cooktop you're using?
Yeah, and this one's gas, but you have the small electric ones that work great as well. And then we have our finished batter. So all we have to do, I'll just set this aside. All we have to do here is allow this then to set. I'll be honest, last week I was testing this recipe and making some right away. It worked. What happens is it will thicken just a little bit as it sets. There's our timer on this. Okay, perfect. So you do want to let it set if you can. If you have to run with it, you may need to add a little bit of water or thin it out with that almond milk or whatever you're using. So I can set this aside. And then just pull up some of the batter that I already had made earlier. And then we've got the pan ready to go. It should be nice and hot, maybe too hot. You don't know till you get your first one in there. But the ladle that I have here is a 2-ounce ladle. And what it does is it makes a crepe for the 8-inch pan, just the size that I'm looking for. It's going to make it about like that. And you can see this is, almost paper thin. So that's what we're striving for tonight. And what I do, I'm right-handed. If you're right or left-handed, it doesn't matter, but whatever pan or hand you feel most comfortable turning the pan with is what you want to use to hold the pan. So I'm going to turn this up just slightly, because as you drop the batter in there, it's so thin, you want to swirl it around so that it covers the whole bottom of the pan and doesn't leave any pukas. If it leaves pukas, and I'll show you, we just pour a little bit more batter over there to patch it. So
Susan asked a technical question.
Yep.
Have you ever noticed that some nonstick pans sometimes have a little smell that's a little bit weird? Is that a sign that the pan should not be used? I'm not smelling yours.
I have not, but I do know that a lot of things when they're new, like new ovens, probably applies as well to, certainly cast iron skillets. When you heat them up for the first time, they will release a little bit of an odor. When we had a bakery in California, our huge oven, when we fired it up for the first time, it smelled very unpleasant for a couple of days. All of the metal was sort of curing or doing whatever it does. So if it's new, that could probably be expected. If it's old, I'm not sure. Google could probably tell you if something's going on there, but you may want to get rid of it. And you can see I'm just pouring that in and swirling it around, trying to cover
no oil or butter or anything, huh?
No butter, nope. Like I said earlier, I sprayed this the first time because this is kind of old. It's a couple years old, a couple Christmases ago, and it's not as nonstick as it was. We've washed it through the machine, and they don't last forever. So that's why I don't spend a whole lot of money buying the high-end ones. Just get one that's that you take care of, and you don't need spray at all. And then I recommend you get a spatula. There's a couple different kinds, but you want to get the one with the red handle. These are heat resistant. They can be purchased at Bar Greens as well, but like the little plastic white ones like I had earlier will, that one will tend to melt if the pan's too hot. So you can see, I'm just setting this off to the side, and I want to make sure that it's loose around the edge, and then I'm going to flip it. We're really cooking at like 90% of the way on the first side, and then we flip it. The last 10% is really basically done. And then I can slide it off onto here. I'll make it easier for you to see, actually. Let me put a piece of paper down. Like that. I'll do another one. Now that did stick a little bit more than it was the same pan I was using in the kitchen earlier. So if you have trouble with the first one, you may need to do a little bit of spray, but make sure you get a spray, and we've talked about this the last couple of weeks, that doesn't have emulsifiers, because those can degrade the quality of your nonstick pan. So lecithin, I think, is the ingredient that's doing it. So just look for lecithin or emulsifiers on the label of your spray, and don't use that one. So another 2 ounces in the middle, swirl it around, get it nice and even. And you have some leeway here in the thickness of the crepe that you make in terms of the batter. So you can make a thinner batter or a slightly thicker batter. If you go thinner, you can tend to have a bunch of little pukas. And sometimes that's what you want, sometimes it's not, depends on what you're making with it. But tonight I don't want that, so this is about perfect, the batter for us. And you can see, I'm gonna flip this one early. It's not golden brown yet, it's still a little bit on the lighter side. This one's a little bit darker, has a little bit more color. Up to you. What are you looking for? You can do 50-50, half on the front side, half on the back side, because once you flip it, the other side looks a little bit different. And I'll show you that here in a second when that comes loose. And then while that one's cooking, I'm going to just show you some filling. I did some apple tonight. Actually, it's 2 apples and a pear. And all I did was put them in a saute pan with some water, and I boiled them with a lid on it. Added a pinch of allspice, that was it. No added sugar, nothing else added to it. That was just really, really simple. It doesn't mean that you have to do it that way. You may want to add a little sugar. You may want to use canned pie filling or whatever, fresh fruit, mango. Other fruits will give you more juice. This one I was going to take a little bit of yogurt and stir it in. This is just some non-fat or low-fat cherry yogurt. And that will help bind it together a little bit. This will be done. And you can see the difference on the two sides. If you do a little bit more heat on the second side, it's a little bit more pale, but you get the spots, and it can look kind of nice that way. Totally up to you. You gotta click it. All right, I'm gonna start one more here. So someone asked earlier whether or not we could freeze the batter. Yes, you can freeze this. You can also freeze these. So I tend to use parchment paper. You can see here, I made a whole lot earlier. So I have a layer in between each one, but that's not necessary. Once they cool, you can stack them straight. But if you're storing them for a long period of time or freezing them, I recommend you put something in between, a layer, to keep them from sticking once you take them out of the freezer. Okay, so there's my filling and my apple. And if they're not stuck, you can sometimes, earlier in the kitchen, I was flipping them. This table's a little higher, but that works as well if you want to practice. If you can flip this, you successfully can work a saute station. So I can lay these out now and just add a little bit of the filling. Couple places here. Did you have any other questions, Jim? Are we good?
There's a couple of questions here. Some good
Yeah,
ones.
go ahead.
Kathy asks, so we can use cooking spray before pouring if the pan is older. You said you could, right?
You can if it's necessary. I wouldn't use it unless you are having trouble with the pan sticking. If it's a good non-stick, you shouldn't need it at all.
Okay. Then Carla asks, how about those orange non-stick pans they show on TV in the ads? Do you know about them?
Like Copper Chef or something. I've seen them on TV. I've never used one. But so, yeah, I can't speak to the quality or whatnot, but I mean, on TV, they look good.
Now,
Who knows?
one more hardware question. Francis wants to know, does the cooktop use Sterno as fuel?
This particular one is the canister. So this is like a little Iwatani burner. So we just use the canned gas. These work great. They're $20 or so, Walmart or wherever. And then you can get like 4 cans for around $1, maybe up to $2 each. You just insert that there, lock it in place, and you've got a gas stove. And this thing really cooks. So it works great for camping and cooking outdoors or going to luau's, going to the beach. Works outstanding. Great question.
Jackie, I just want to intercede for a minute. Jim, can we hold the hardware questions until after?
Sure.
Because we still have a savory crepe to demonstrate, if I'm not mistaken.
Certainly.
Yeah.
No but there are a few cooking questions in there that we might want to ask.
Okay. This is a related question. How would you make a tortilla? Is it similar to a crepe?
Yeah, tortillas with corn, of course. Well, you mean, I always think corn tortillas, but flour tortillas as well. But yeah, they're usually pattied by hand first, or they make little presses that you can use. And then it is cooked the same exact way on a little skillet or flat top or a hot rock, depends on where you're at. If you're in a village somewhere in the mountains, you can do it that way. Works great. So that's a great question. So I mean, really quick, I'm just showing you for the dessert, I'll tend to do 2 fillings or 2 batches of filling. I'll put one little bit in the corner. I'll fold it over. I'll put a little bit more here so it's layered. Sometimes I might even put that yogurt there as well, but I'm going to put it on top. And then I'll fold this over here. And then I end up with a nice folded triangle in this case. And then I've got just some regular yogurt low fat, plain, and it's up to you. I mean, you could use whipped cream if you wanted to not be healthy, but we try to focus on as healthy as possible. And then of course, fresh fruit is great. So I've got a couple blueberries here that I could add. And I've got a strawberry. So I'm just going to cut a quick strawberry fan. Super simple, put that in the middle. We're not dusting it with powdered sugar. Traditionally, it would be dusted in a restaurant or generally speaking, but that's a little added sugar that you don't need. This has zero added sugar, period. You've got the berries, you've got the little bit of sugar in the yogurt, but you don't need to add a bunch of sugar to the dish to make it flavorful and delicious. And then I know Jack,
non-dairy substitute.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can get non-dairy substitutes as well. You could serve ice cream on top. This could be warm, it could be cold at room temperature. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you. So there's so many products out there. It's kind of up to you to decide what you want to use, but I recommend you always try to stick with the things that you're used to and the things that you are familiar with. That way it's easy for you to produce them. And then I just want to show like the crepe for the savory. I've already made the filling. And this is just chicken soup, chicken vegetable soup, canned. And I tightened it up a little bit. If you're buying condensed soup, I would recommend you just don't add the water. So I added extra chicken. This one had, I didn't add the water because I wanted to keep it thick. I added a little bit of rice and some diced chicken, some fresh dill from Jackie Malley. Works out great. And same thing here, but I'm going to do it more like a burrito or I'm going to roll it into a round. So I can take a couple here. I'll just do 2 and spoon a little bit in the center. Basically like an enchilada, I guess would be more accurate. And I make sure that I heat or do my filling first and then I let it cool. I don't want to work with it boiling hot. It makes it a little harder to handle and work with. I then roll it up just like that. So I'm just folding it over, rolling it up. And then you could transfer this to the dish you're going to bake it in and serve it in if you want to, or if you're baking them separately. I have a greased pan here. Putting it there, and I like to put usually like a little bit of cheese and some low-fat cheese on top. That's optional, you don't have to. This is a great dish with the cream of mushroom soup, that and some diced chicken and some fresh mushrooms. It's delicious. This would then just get baked, and if I put it in the oven, voila, just like Martha Stewart, done. This one I put in low because we have the show going on. I wanted to make sure that it was nice and hot and ready to go when we were done and not over baked. So I had a lower temp here, about 250, and I did it for 20 minutes. You might have heard that timer a little while ago. And I put a piece of parchment down on this one just to make sure I didn't want it sticking and falling apart when I was plating it here. And it should come off no problem. Just making sure that it's not stuck. It's still warm, and I'm just going to slide it off. And I didn't do any vegetables or a starch because if you look at this dish, for the most part, it's already providing you with all of those things. The vegetables are inside the filling. The protein is in the filling. The sauce is in the filling. I added a little bit of cheese, and you got the carbs from the flour that's in the crepe itself, and it's really like a served by itself kind of dish. Now you could come back and add a little bit of your filling on top if you wanted to identify what it was. A little garnish of sorts. I sprinkled some fresh dill on top of this one as well, but super simple to make that, and you're good to go for any number of dishes that you want to create with crepe. So, I mean, get super creative. Use the stuff that's in your refrigerator. Like I said here with the apple and the the yogurt and the pear. This will turn out really, really nicely. I also had some marmalade. This is homemade orange marmalade. Grant Sato over at Kapiolani Community College made this and gave it to me, I think, a couple of years ago, a beautiful jar that I use for things like this from time to time. So it would add a little extra sugar because it's sweet. But if I wanted to come back to that dessert item and spoon a little bit on top, I could do that as well. Great.
Sterno, if you go back a little bit, Char wanted to know if the roll technique is different for different sizes of the crepes.
Great question, Shar. I would say for this particular, if you're rolling them, I wouldn't do like a 12-inch crepe. This is, like I said, about 8 inches, which is usually about the largest that I would go. And it is more or less like an enchilada size that you would get in a restaurant, or the tortillas that you'll find in the store. So if you get too big, you're going to have a hard time transporting it. If it's served in a casserole dish without being taken out, just spooned out, then you could probably do that. But I would recommend you, if you're going to take the time to do it, kind of present it in an individual way. So this would be enough for 3 people. This is a pretty hearty sized crepe. So 1 per person would be plenty. For an entree or for dinner, I'd probably go with 2 of these, 3 if you're really hungry.
And then Maxine had an interesting question. She said she's made manicotti and didn't flip the crepe over until there were a few bubbles. Was she doing it correctly, waiting for the bubbles?
Yeah, absolutely. You probably can't see it. We didn't have that close-up shot enough to recognize that there were bubbles. And that's what you'll sort of see. Let me see if I can hold one of these up. Yeah, you'll see the bubbles. I don't know if that works. I don't have that angle up on my screen, but there are all kinds of tiny little bubbles. It's not the brown part. You'll see the tiny bubbles if you're making it in a pan. And if you're doing pancakes, that's exactly what you look for. You look for those bubbles to rise to the top from the leavening agent, and then those bubbles pop. And when they pop, that's when it's time to turn the pancake. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Look for those bubbles.
And then somebody else asked, do you have to bake the savory crepes after you fill it?
You do not. No, absolutely not. The crepes cooked, the fillings cooked. If you're melting cheese on top, you don't even really need to bake it. You can microwave it, do it in your toaster oven like we have here, but it's not necessary. You don't absolutely do not have to bake it afterwards. What I like about it is, and you can't really tell, but it adds a little crispness. So they'll dry out around the edge, and now you've got a contrast in texture. When your crepe comes off and cools, it's soft, it's rubbery, it's delicious. I ate about 8 of them when I was making this recipe the other day.
Oh, we just have to watch.
Yeah, if you have a soft filling, then you don't have any contrast in texture. So if you want a little crunch and crispness, that's the beauty of adding it to the oven.
The mouse asked, can you suggest some other savory fillings?
Yeah, pretty much anything you like. Beef, vegetables, straight up vegetables, curries, anything that you see in a stew or see in a soup. You do want a little bit of sauce there. You don't want it to be completely dry. It's nice to have something that'll hold it together and something that gives some moisture to the finished product. So anything that you like in terms of stew. I mean, we had some clam chowder here today, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could strain it and do a clam filled one. You could do shrimp, you could do crab, you could do, you name it. You could recreate your favorite sushi, but use crepes. So just think outside the box. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Linda wanted to know if you added any liquid to the cream of mushroom soup.
No. Great question, Linda. For fillings for these, I tend to keep them on the thicker side. So if you're buying condensed soup, don't add the liquid, Linda. You want your filling to be a little on the thick side, like a really hearty chili or stew. Chili would be good inside as well. If you're buying a soup that's not condensed, it has extra liquid, then you'll want to tighten it up with cornstarch slurry or something like that. And then that'll just absorb it. You could throw in your leftover rice. That's what I did. I mentioned earlier today. Rather than tighten it up, I threw in some rice that I had and it absorbed that extra liquid. It gave me some rice in the dish. Works perfect.
Corky's mom wants to know, baking a savory crepe in a regular, not a toaster oven, what temperature should we use and for how long?
Yeah, in a normal baking, whether it's toaster or a conventional oven, even convection oven, 350 is a great solid temp to work with. And if you go at 350, you're really just warming it up and adding, like I said, that crisp edge. So I would say anywhere between 8 and 15 minutes, depending on how big the pan is, how many you're making, but it won't take long. You're just warming it up and then you're crisping up the outer edge a little bit. Great question.
Yeah, they are good. Dana asked, and I think, how much filling were you placing in the crepes when you were making them? That was a few steps back.
Yeah, this one, it's up to you. I think I'd put on the recipe a half a cup if you're doing like fruit fillings and stuff, but it just depends who you're serving it to, how tight you want the roll. If you do less filling, then you might be able to get that crepe to wrap around 2 times. So you get a little bit more crepe to filling ratio, up to you. For fruit, I made these actually probably bigger than I would if I were serving it, just because if it's too small, it's kind of hard for you guys to see it. But I ended up with just like a regular chef spoon inside the center, which is probably 1/4 of a cup. And then I put a little bit less than that on that second fold for the fruit. And then on this one, I'm probably looking at about a half a cup of filling per crepe.
We just had a question from Yoshiko. What is a good base for a vegetable crepe?
Oh, great question, Yoshiko. I think next week, I can't remember if next week's roasted vegetables and curry, but any type of vegetable filling. I mean, whatever's fresh. And if you're not doing fresh, you can always get the medleys that they sell in the frozen section at the supermarket. Even canned vegetables would work. Drain them and mix corn or mushrooms, sort of the traditional filling. Chicken and mushroom is one of the most common. But whatever vegetables you like are absolutely the ones that you should be using. So if it's zucchini and onions and peppers and things like that, you probably want to saute them a little bit. A lot of people put some cheese inside, some feta, some tofu inside would be good. Just make a nice vegetable that you might even just serve on the side with a regular dinner and roll it up inside. It's just a different way to present some of the things that you make already at home. Super, super easy and convenient.
I guess Larry just typed something in. If I need to mass produce for, say, a party of 10 to eat simultaneously, could I bake the crepes in an oven?
As opposed to using a skillet, no. There's no easy way to do that. They do have some silicone mats these days that have little indentations that are made for, designed to make like fruit leather, like the fruit roll-ups. My wife makes them at home. But in a crepe, you got to use a pan. You might be able to get away with a flat top or a griddle, like a pancake griddle, but it might get away from you. You won't get that nice round shape. That's what we're looking for here. But if you've got to mass produce, and trust me, it's fun until you're working in a hotel and they tell you to make 1,000 of these and you've got like 4 pans going at the same time. And it's really, timing and all those goals that I outlined early in the show become really important because you have to time it so that you can work 4 different pans. If you just get 2 pans, 10 people, 20 people, that's no problem. Wouldn't take you long at all. Maybe an hour, not even.
Believe it or not, those are all the questions. Whoops, is there one more? Oh, there is one more.
Okay.
If you're making it ahead, can you transport on-baked crepes and bake them when you get there?
Yeah, absolutely. And you could even do it at room temperature. I would just say be cautious, right? If you are transporting food and it's potentially hazardous, it has meat or something else in it, then just be aware of how long it's out at room temperature. But these would be fine at room temperature. Or you could throw it in the oven when you get there just to warm it up. Or take it in a microwavable dish and just throw it in the microwave and give it a little zap. And that would work great as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great questions, everyone. Thanks so much. And thank you, Jim, for moderating that.
And thanks, Jim. That was, I'm excited. I've always wanted to make crepes, but I'm hoping my kids are going to make them for me on Sunday because I think it's Mother's Day.
It is, Mother. I have batter. Send them over. Come on.
So I wanted to just mention that Vera Young, you have won a door prize and we weren't able to get a response from you in the chat. So you can email jboland@aarp.org. If you'd like to claim your prize, just send me your mailing address and we'll get that out to you. And then also I wanted to mention next week we are doing curry roasted vegetables and chicken, which I think is going to be delicious. But I want to do a quick promo for some upcoming events that we have that are focused on fun and fraud prevention. In particular, I want to just solicit your help, any of you who are not working during the day at 2 p.m. on the 11th. My volunteer team is launching a new trivia activity, and they've all been trained, but we need some people to participate in a trivia game that is hosted by Challenge Entertainment. It's going to be a Family Feud style trivia game, and it will have some fraud trivia mixed in, but basically you don't have to be super duper smart. You just have to guess what the public opinion poll answer was on the question. So if you're willing to help us test it out, we sure really love to have you. And you can sign up at aarp.org/hi, or if you're interested in any of these fraud events, we do have a fraud calendar going on that includes a movie night, this weekend's Teletown Hall, and then of course our special event on the 22nd with an actual con artist. So I hope you'll sign up for those, and we'll look forward to seeing you for sure next week for curry roasted vegetables and chicken. Thanks everybody. And thanks Dan, Alice, David, and Jim. Hope everybody has a great evening. Mahalo.
Aloha.